Okay, this next one is an Italian family secret. If you see my grandmother, don't tell her that I put this online. Also, she doesn't know that the rest of us have been making this for like 2 decades now. If you can keep a secret, I promise you it's gonna be worth it. Before we start making the bread, just know that there is an easy button for this and there's no shame in taking it. Over the years, instead of making the dough from scratch, my grandmother would just go to a local bakery and buy bread dough. Not only does it save you a ton of time, but it also comes out as good, if not better. Another way that I've done it, and I know my mom has done it, is just going and buying pre-made pizza dough at like Trader Joe's or Whole Foods or something. But I'm gonna show you how to do it if you wanted to make everything yourself. You are gonna need a food scale for this. Whenever I'm making dough, I always go by grams because volume can always differ. First thing we're gonna add is 5 grams of yeast. Try not to spill it absolutely everywhere. Now we're gonna measure out 83 grams of warm water. Make sure it's warm, not boiling. You don't want it over 90 degrees, so it's probably smart to have a thermometer nearby. If it's over 110 degrees, it is way too hot and it's gonna kill all the yeast, and this is way too hot. We're gonna let this cool down until it's like 90 degrees and then we'll add it to the yeast. Now just whisk it up pretty quickly. We wanna wake up all that yeast. And now we're just gonna let it sit for like 5 to 10 minutes. It should look nice and bubbly and frothy, just like this. If not, your yeast is dead and you gotta start over. Pretty sure this yeast is dead. When did this expire? July 20th, 2021. It's definitely dead. Make sure you check the expiration date on your yeast before you use it. All right, now we're gonna bust out our stand mixer. I'm gonna measure out 462 grams of bread flour. If you're using cups, it's like 3.5 cups. That goes on there. Make sure you got the dough hook on. Now that we have yeast that's actually alive, we're gonna put our mixer on the lowest speed, and then I've got 240 grams of ice water. We're not gonna pour all of it in, but we're gonna pour most of it in. Oh, try not to get any ice cubes in there. Then we're gonna throw in our yeast mixture. The reason why we saved a little bit of this water is so we can add it to the yeast bowl and make sure you get every little drop. We're gonna let this mix and come together for about 1 to 3 minutes. All right, now we stop it. Pull it off the hook, we get a dough ball. Not done yet. Got 10 grams of sea salt, that's gonna go in, and then we're gonna mix it for 1 more minute. Now we're done, we've got a dough ball and a clean bowl. Just gonna give it like a quick fold onto itself just a couple times. Throw that in the bowl. We're gonna cover this with plastic wrap or a towel, and we're gonna let this sit somewhere warm, like on top of the oven or in an oven that's turned off for at least an hour. While that's resting, we can work on our thing that makes this bread so good is that you're taking essentially a full charcuterie board and shoving it inside of a bread dough. So let's go over what kind of meat we're gonna use. This bread contains not 1, not 2, but 3 Italian meats. The first one is a good pepperoni. Whatever you get that's pre-sliced, we're just gonna cut into strips so you don't have to be precise about it. Set this off to the side while we work on our salami. I know, it's rare to see salami in log form and then pepperoni sliced like that, but whatever, that's what I found. We want a combination of different textures in this bread. So we got 1 thin sliced. For this one, we want it chunky. We're just gonna slice it lengthwise, about 1/4 inch thick. This is gonna give you a good little chew when you bite into the bread. So kind of like a small dice, just like that. The secret ingredient that makes this bread as good as it is salt pork. It's basically just pure fat, so when it cooks in the bread, it just gives these like pockets of moist deliciousness. If you can't find salt pork, you can get uncured pancetta or bacon. It won't be quite as good, but it'll still be good. As far as the salt pork goes, it's the only one we're gonna pre-cook before we add it to the bread. If not, it's gonna be just kind of gross and chewy and gummy. We're gonna cut this into small cubes as well, and then put it into a cold pan, bring that up to medium heat, let that render for 5 to 10 minutes until it's nice and crispy all the way around. Whatever you do, do not throw away that delicious fat. That's going in the bread. We've got our dough. They've both risen a little bit. If you're doing it, you might as well just make a big batch. Give some of your friends and family. You can't just make a little bit. We would always make a massive double or triple batch. It's the Italian, I don't know. This is where we introduce our mountain of meat. It's not just Arby's that has the meats anymore. So in each one, start by adding all that pepperoni, all the salami, and then finally all of the salt pork. All right, make sure every little piece goes in there. I know what you're thinking, all this protein, all this meat, it's probably too healthy, right? So hold on. I also have a nice handful of pecorino romano cheese. That's going into each bread loaf as well. For the piece, the last part of it, remember all that fat that we had from rendering off all that salt pork? Yeah, she's going in too. If you got any rings or anything that you don't want to end up in your bread, take them off. Now these are gonna get dirty. Yeah, you know what to do. Roll up your sleeves, dig in there, and just work this all the way through the dough. Yeah, your hands are gonna get all greasy and gross. And it might look like there's too much meat, but remember, we're gonna proof this one more time, so this is gonna rise again and give it a little bit more space. Sometimes there's just so much meat, you gotta use 2 hands, you know? Once you think you're mixed up pretty well, there's a couple ways we can do this. What my family would do, put it into a big baking dish or roasting pan, and then let this sit covered in the oven overnight for it to double again. I'm gonna do it a little different. I'm gonna do it like I would a sourdough. We've got our dough ball, we've got our bowl. I'm gonna line the bowl with a kitchen towel, just so it makes it easy to get this out of here. Then I'm just gonna dust this really well with flour. Then our dough goes in. Just lightly set that on top. I'm gonna cover this up with plastic wrap. We're gonna let this slowly rise in the refrigerator for 24 hours. 24 hours later. Yes, I'm wearing the same clothes, whatever. Now I'm hungry, I want bread. 1, taking the bread out of the fridge, letting it sit on the counter for at least an hour to warm up. 2, we're gonna preheat the oven to 500 degrees, as hot as it's gonna go. 3, I like to use this deep cast iron skillet that has a lid. Throw both of those in the oven and let them heat up for no less than 1 hour. The rest is pretty easy. When we're finally ready to cook, carefully pull out the rack that has the deepest cast iron skillet. We're gonna flip our bread dough right into that incredibly hot cast iron skillet, cover it with the lid, and let it bake for about 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, we're gonna take the top pan off and cook it for another 10 minutes just so the top gets all crispy and crunchy. When the bread comes out of the oven, take it out of the pan, let it rest on a cutting board, and do your best not to cut into this for at least 30 minutes. This is the hardest part of the whole thing, but I promise it'll be worth it. I'm gonna try this 2 ways. I've got the traditional way, which is going into a baking dish. We're gonna bake that at 325 degrees for about 45 minutes. That's gonna give you something more like focaccia bread, which is a little softer. I like a really thick crust, so I'm gonna see which one turns out better. And what you're left with is probably one of the most delicious things in the world. I promise you. It's salty, it's crunchy, it's chewy. It's absolutely terrible for you, but in the best way possible. Don't forget to subscribe. These recipes are only getting more delicious. We'll see you next time. Also, YouTube thinks you'll like this video, so click on that one.